It is 2:15. Thank you everyone for joining in. So I think we can get started, and then when other people come in, they can join us. So thank you for taking your time. So today we'll talk about ways you can govern open source in an enterprise and some strategies for OSPOs. So if you don't know what an OSPO is, it's an open source program office. This is usually, let's say, a group of people, or if you're a smaller company, it can be a person that takes care of open source. So processes, compliance, and all these types of things. But first of all, who am I? So yes, my name is David Hirsch. I work for Dynatrace. I've been working there now for about 5 years. I've been involved with open source for quite some time, so mostly with the CNCF and Linux Foundation. And over the years, I've participated in different areas. So as a CNCF ambassador, as a maintainer for some open source projects that are part of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, such as Kepton and OpenFeature. I've helped organize, let's say, large conferences. So, well, not that large, but let's say around 300 people within Austria. And in my spare time, I got a master's and did some research on how open source can help drive innovation within companies in the IT industry. So that being said, we can hop right in. So what is open source and what are open source program offices? So imagine that right now in the world, around 96% of software has some open source components in it. But only around 55% of companies are actually organized and have an open source program office to manage how they consume open source, how they contribute, or how they create their own projects. And this creates a lot of risks, but it also leaves a lot of space for opportunities for companies to get involved. So open source, as I said, is very popular, very common, is essentially everywhere. Every piece of technology we touch has open source in it. And it's a valuable tool because it can help you drive innovation. And often it is associated with cost savings, yes, but it is also a matter of having flexibility. So if you want to use open source, you then are open to evolve in the future and change how you do things because the code is, let's say, free to change or is all visible. You're not locked into a specific vendor. And I would say additionally, one thing is if you are in an OSPO or if you don't have one, this can be quite helpful because it can help you create the structures to take care of governance. Let's say, make sure you do not have any security vulnerabilities when it comes to the components you are using. And at the same time, it can help you navigate whenever you have any legal challenges or community challenges as well. So how can companies really work with open source? And by this, I mean everything that goes from consuming open source, so you see a project and you use it in your code, to contributing, so creating changes, fixes, however you want to call it, to other existing projects and contributing upstream, or also when it comes to creating your own open source projects. So this is something where enterprises and companies in general have been involved for a long time, with larger enterprises such as Google, Microsoft, or Spotify, for example, leading the way, but also some more local ones. So for example, if you look at Japan, there is Sony, who's a huge contributor. There are many within India and within China as well that contribute heavily, such as Huawei. These are huge contributors in the open source space. So as mentioned before, when it comes to open source, there's a lot of opportunities that you have and some challenges. So when you're using open source, you do have the chance to let's say, accelerate development, this is because you are not only relying on your own engineering power, let's call it like that, but you can count on a larger community to help you create and develop software. A lot of companies have done this extremely successfully. So think of Red Hat, who has essentially created a product around an open source project. Do they offer a specific distribution? Yes. Do they build with services on top? Of course. And these are just different models. You have also things like Databricks or Grafana or, I don't know, Backstage with Spotify. These are all companies that built open source and then started to create around it to find possible business models. This also becomes then a discussion around efficiency and scalability. So why cost efficiency? Well, you can test a project or a piece of software when it's open source without having to commit to a long-term financial relationship with a company. So you can try it. If it fits your use case, fantastic. If it doesn't, you don't have this upfront cost. At the same time, when it does come to open source, this has a higher level of trust most times compared to closed source software. This is because when something is open source, it's very difficult to change the license, for example. And it's also because, again, everything is visible. A lot of people in the past would say open source is less secure than proprietary software, but most of the time this isn't the case. It's actually quite the opposite, because you do have the rule of more eyes make better software, and most of the time have better quality as well. When it comes to challenges, we navigate into things such as compliance and legal. So it can be difficult to find the right licenses and make sure you are using that piece of software correctly. Again, here, I mentioned security vulnerabilities because there is this impression. So whenever an open source piece of software has a vulnerability, it is public. Most of the time with proprietary software, this doesn't happen. So there could be vulnerabilities, but they're probably fixed without you having to know about them. And finally, in my opinion, the most complex part for open source is really the community side and the governance side. And here I mean real open source projects where you have a governance committee made up of people coming from different companies or that are individual contributors, rather than having an open source project driven by a single company. This is something we tried in the past. So as Dynatrace, we released some open source projects, which are now part of the Linux Foundation. And we had one project called Captain, where we launched it mostly on our own and then open sourced it. This was quite difficult for the community because they weren't sure, is this really open source or is this just a company project that one day will become closed? So this created some friction. Instead, another case we had was with open feature, so a standardization for feature flagging. And here we really, from day one, built it together with the community and had it immediately as a sandbox project in the CNCF. And now it's one of the fastest growing projects, and it's doing quite well. So we are just now participants. We have no ownership. We are just happy to be there and make the project grow with others. So we've spoken a bit about open source challenges and some of the opportunities. Now I want to go more specific in how, as an open source program office or just as an open source expert within your company, you can help move things along. So in my opinion, there are three important aspects, or at least this is how I deal with them within Dynatrace. So we have the community aspect, and with this I mean both your internal community and your external community. Internal here is usually quite forgotten by most OSPOs, and I mean with internal community, I really mean the group of developers that you have within your own company that are contributing to open source and that can help you really build a culture of an open source first approach. When it comes to legal and security, again, this is, I think, what most OSPOs traditionally take care of. And this is how most of them start out. So there is a need for compliance, for legal certainty, let's put it like that. And so they build an OSPO with legal experts that know the licenses and the interactions with one another. Especially because most countries now have as a requirement to have a software bill of materials. So having a legal expert in-house, which knows the different open source licenses, can really help. And the final one for me is really embedding the open source approach into the way you do research and development. So this is, on a general level, whenever you have any software development, I really recommend trying to have an open source approach. But let's dive into each one of these one at a time. So the first one, when it comes to building an open source community. Again, here this is about the internal and the external communities. This is about creating a collaborative space in which everyone within the organization and outside your organization is aware of how you do open source and is happy to exchange their experiences and help build this knowledge. This can be done in many ways. You can do this through internal talks. You can do this through knowledge sharing blogs, through Slack channels, Discord communities, you name it. There are lots of different ways you can do this. We've tried a little bit of everything, and right now we try to approach it with having somewhat regular talks within the company where people present their contributions to open source or their experiences in general with the community. And another one is really creating, again, with this knowledge, a base where people can go and find out immediately how to behave with open source. So this was probably the first thing I did in my first year at Dynatrace, was building kind of a best practices. So what does that mean? It means when you want to contribute to a project, how do you go about this? It can be so simple, such as suggesting, hey, don't go in and push your ideas heavily immediately in a project where no one knows you, but first behave a bit as a lurker. So look around, see how people interact. What are their chosen tools? What type of language do they use? And from there, you can basically decide and figure out the best way to start contributing. We always recommend, for example, starting with something small. So maybe review a few pull requests, have a look, give suggestions, or maybe there's some fixes you can make in their documentation. A lot of open source contributions that are needed are actually outside of the technical domain. So they're more of the chop wood and carry water tasks, which need to be done, but there are actually few people that are really interested in those because most people think of code. You can also create training within your company. So we have this as an onboarding module. Whenever someone joins Dynatrace in R&D, we teach them about open source. How does it work? Where can they find the material? And how to get started. And finally, yes, creating really this platform of sharing and showing how important open source is within the different parts of R&D can help build this trust and can help create groups where they exchange knowledge and again, become more contributors within the company. One thing we started, for example, now recently was a discourse community. So we built a community where we have all the members, for example, within our DevRel team, so our developer relations, within our open source team, contributing the content that they build around open source, and sharing and leaving the space for people to comment and ask questions. We're also using this, for example, to share open source events where people could go speak, such as here. And later I'll share a link where you can go and have a look at this. So we've really opened this up. So if anyone wants to join and ask questions, they can. or else you can just check out the content without having to interact. And for us, this is really a way about creating some content and sharing the knowledge we have gathered with the rest of the open source community. And again, this is meant for both the internal and external. So we do have other subforums, which are, for example, hidden to just internal members, but we have most of it, which is in the open. And we really try to open as much of it as possible. Another important thing you can do within your company is recognizing contributions. So here you have an example of a dashboard we built, which in the next few days will also be available open source. So you can take it, download it, try it out, where we really focus on who is contributing to what projects, what type of contributions, and are they our internal projects? Are they part of the external community? And we really try to figure out what and where our people are more active. This is also a good way for us to take care of one of the, let's say, larger issues, which is often showing to the different parts of your organization how open source contributions are helping your business move forward. This is one of those questions where many OSPOs have a huge question mark because they're quite unsure on what to do and how to do this. But this is something we're working on. And again, we're still trying to get it, let's say, perfectly working. But we've found for now a pretty good solution. This also opens up a moment in which we can, on a monthly, weekly, whatever, yearly basis, go to some of our employees and say, hey, fantastic. We really see how you're contributing to open source, and we can make this visible within our organization and outside. But that's enough on the community side. I want to move into the more legal and security related aspects. So as I said before, a lot of open source program offices were initially born because of this legal and security needs within a company. And again, here, some of the main aspects are really the license compliance. So making sure you are not infringing the rules of different open source licenses, whether they be copyleft, copyright, share alike, all these different licenses, making sure they can work together and making sure they are also compatible with the use you want to make of them. Another important aspect is the vulnerability management. This is definitely something you will do with your security team. And the same can be said for the supply chain management. Again, for all of these aspects, there are many, many tools out there which have been built by the community and which work quite well. For example, for license compliance, you have the FOSSA tool, which can help you check a software bill of materials and make sure that all the items are compatible and that the licenses work together. Essentially giving you some security on whether you can make a correct use of that project or not. When it comes instead to vulnerability management, again, you have a lot of open source tools, some available on GitHub, such as Dependabot, Renovate, or you also have others, such as the OWASP. Again, these are tools that just help you navigate dependencies and make sure there are no critical vulnerabilities in your code. There are plenty of other open source ones available, which you can use for free. And finally, a more common topic of the last few years is definitely around supply chain management. Again, making sure that the components and pieces of software that you are using are coming from where you think they are. There have been some vulnerabilities over the years and issues that have come up, but also some projects have emerged which can help you. One of them is SigStore, off of which many other projects have been built and pieces of software, as well as the SLSA, which is another project you can use to make sure your supply chain is secure. But now I want to jump in and give you an example of how, for example, we manage the compliance process within Dynatrace. So here you can see the flow of what happens from when someone puts in a request, let's say to use a library or a component all the way to the completion. So the first step is definitely the request comes in and we have an initial review. This is usually done by the OSPO. So we check the project for the project health, for the compliance with basic license aspects. This can be anything from just checking, is this on our, we call it traffic light list of licenses. So is it green? Yes, go ahead. Yellow, we need some more consideration. And red, absolutely do not use. So let's say we do a first check, everything looks good, and we decide to move to the automated scan part. Here we're really checking for vulnerabilities within the supply chain. This means using some of the tools we mentioned before to check that this is actually a secure piece of software that we want to include in our product or projects. Then the third step is the legal review. Very often this isn't necessary. Some of the licenses, as I said, are on our green list and we just say, okay, no problem, you can use this, and we don't need any additional review. There are others that end up on this yellow light, which need some additional consideration. This can go everywhere from long reviews going into compatibility of the licenses, as well as the source of this code. This happens quite rarely, as most developers by now have a good sense of which projects to use and which licenses to look for. So let's say we've completed all three steps. Fantastic. We have then the approval. We share the feedback with the developer or engineer that put in the request. And we give them the green light to move forward. So the component can be used for testing, for product development, for additional project development. And then on our side and with the security team, we will continue monitoring. So we will make sure that no vulnerabilities are introduced, that there are no license changes, and it will get added essentially to our software library. Cool. All right, so this is just an example. Again, we have, I would say, three processes that are quite similar. So this is for the consumption of open source. So project exists, and we say, hey, we want to use it. There are then the other ones which are for contribution and for creating our own open source projects, which are quite similar. But I'll go into the creation later because that one does have some additional thoughts that need to go into it. And moving on how do you embed all of this into your R&D processes? Well, the fact is you really need to combine open source usage with your internal development. So again, I think Dynatrace has somewhere around 30 to 60,000 open source components that are used every day. These are all documented in our software bill of materials. And every year this number grows. So by now it is quite well integrated in our regular product development, but it wasn't an easy step. So we did have to build this kind of culture. So here you'll see I mentioned the culture of inner source. This is just taking the concepts of open source and applying them within the boundaries of your company. So my project won't be open to the world. It will be open to my entire organization, for example. And finally, one thing we do to help our developers when choosing is really this health check that I mentioned before. And this is as simple as checking if a project is entirely maintained by a single person. This could be a bit of a red flag, because if this person one day decides they don't want to work on it anymore, it will remain, let's say, unmaintained and out of date. Or even if there's a single company managing an open source project. This for us can also be a bit of a red flag, because it means if this company one day decides to change the license of its future version, then we will have to find another solution or go with a paid version of this. So these are all considerations you need to make when deciding on what open source to use. And here's a bit of an example of what our process looks like. So we have the initial request again. We then move into the, so the compliance check. So this is what I mentioned before, making sure licenses are good. Then we have a security check. So checking for vulnerabilities. Yeah, I'm sorry, the colors are not working that well on the screen. Sorry about that. Then we move into really the project health part. So we're checking, is this a good project, yes or no? The first two steps are usually very fast. Most of these are quite automated. It's rare that it takes more than an hour. Let's put it like that. Then we really move into the implementation side. So the architects build kind of a mapping of how this will be integrated into the project or product. The development team starts to use it and works with it. And then we have the continued monitoring, such as before. So not a big difference with the other process, simply some different steps. And really here we tried to, try to make sure it's simple, easy, and fast, and that it doesn't get stuck too long. And since I only have 4 minutes left, so here I'll just want to show you quickly an example of how we monitor our contributions in general. Yes, a lot of purple. The UX person likes purple. So we really tried to have a look at where are we contributing, what type of projects, what type of contributions. So these are all ways for us to figure out where we need to help our teams more and more. So that being said, what comes next? So what I can do is really invite you to do 3 things. One of them is really try to embrace open source as a philosophy, not just a tool. So don't just be there to consume, really try to build this into your company as a culture. Finally, second, an OSPO can really help you make this an easier process and support all the decision makers within your company. And finally, leverage open source and its community to achieve really what is the full potential. Again, here, I really recommend focusing on your internal community. It is often forgotten compared to the external one. So with that, I'm happy to receive any questions. And if you want to ask any questions later on after today, you can also have a look here. You can type in the questions. And this leads to our open source ecosystem forum where you can just ask questions however you want, ask for more details. You can check out the content. Thank you.